Hello, thank
Hello.
you all for joining another show. Yeah, today's
We
show
are
is
live.
awesome. So today's show is extra special because we have our president of the CX business for Question Pro, Ken Peterson. Thank you for taking the time to be a part of
Oh, my
this.
pleasure. My pleasure.
We also have Prachi, of course, here every week with us. She heads our
Also being
commercial business.
omnipresent. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and so just a little bit more about Ken, right? And I mentioned it is a special show, and it really is just because of his just been in the CX industry for what ages now, decades,
Decades.
and both on the
Believe in
client
decades.
side, the agency side. So just so much that we can learn from him. Just going by the stories that he has, right? I've heard so many stories, and each of them are learning opportunities from design and just at the end making sure that your CX is the entire program is a success, right? So just thank you so much for being a part of this. For today's session specifically, and we're going to have you on the show quite a few times, just to share your knowledge with everyone. But for today's show, we wanted to, focus on the differences between transactional surveys and your relationship surveys, right? So a lot of times there is a mix up in terms of what questions do we put into the transaction? Do we have transaction related questions in your relationship survey, right? How long does it need to be? And do we really need the simple question of do we really need both? And when do I deploy them? So just so many questions that we get quite frequently from our clients. So I thought it'll be a great session to have you just walk us through all of these elements and what we need to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
Um, as mentioned, I've been around for a little bit, and I've seen a few things happen in that time. And when we start talking about transactional versus relationship surveys, they both have a real standing in any CX program. And one of the things I'll say, everyone says, I frequently hear, oh, we want to do a CX survey. No, if you're doing CX, you're doing a program. You're doing a holistic view of your customers. You're not simply taking a single survey and saying, oh, this is a CX program. That is not a program, even if you have even if you have closed loop feedback and dashboards and everything. So really, it's the grounding in what is relationship versus transactional and what it means to your business to make those happen. Mm-hmm. So I think one of my favorite comparisons is the length of the survey. I mean, it's very easy when we start talking about transactional versus relationship to say any transactional relationship or transactional survey should be very short. And I'm not, it doesn't have to be one question. Although, if you use something like Question Pro NPS Plus, it can be one question. But it's really you're talking about more frequent. It's triggered by some interaction. And that's why I say it's never, it should never be one survey for your CX program, because you can have an interaction with a contact center, with a purchase, talking to someone over the phone, even getting things like marketing materials is a touch point that we have to consider. So, when something triggers that transactional survey, it should really focus on that transaction. It's one of those things that everyone talks about, transactional NPS. And listen, I'm a huge advocate for NPS, and I'm a huge advocate for having measurements across the board that you can look at from survey to survey within a journey for your customers, and be able to say, okay, this is something that we can compare between one and the other. And NPS is great because of its flexibility, the benchmarks that you can create with it. But really, a transactional survey should be about that transaction. So on that bottom point, I always talk about CSAT and customer effort score as really sort of the key KPIs when we're talking about a transactional survey. It's not to say you have to exclude NPS, but really focus on the operational aspect. I have that point above there. It's about making something in the life of your customer a little bit easier.
Mm.
And I'll be honest, too often we fail just when delivering the survey, which is
Yeah.
like the worst thing in the world. Survey is part of the experience. It's part of the holistic customer experience. But all too often we make them too long. We push them
Yeah.
out there because, oh well, we have the customer on the, and I've said it, I'm as guilty as anyone of saying, hey, we have the customer on the line, wouldn't it be great to know? And I'll say,
Mhm.
if you're designing a transactional survey, um,
Yeah.
if you start off with the phrase, wouldn't it be great to know, nix that question right there. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
don't even
Yeah.
ask it.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah.
Make it focused. Then you can make, if you can make them focused, you can make them more frequent.
Yeah.
um
Mm.
if I've learned over the years, and I get a lot of surveys, and of course I pay attention to them. I'm sure everyone in the world gets as many surveys as I do. I'm pretty confident of that. It's just I happen to pay attention to them, and I also start to recognize a pattern. Like, hey, this one just wants me to answer one question, and that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I will do
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
every time they send the survey because I know I don't have to overcommit to it.
Yeah.
Others are sort of deceptive. They'll send you we just have, 2 minutes of your time. I won't
Yeah.
mention who it is, but 2 minutes of my time, and I click on the survey, and it's
It's
embedded in
never
the
ending.
email, which we can
Yeah.
do. And I think, okay, great. And I click on my response, and then suddenly it opens up another page. And then it
Yeah.
says, tell me what time you went through the line. Do you remember the name of the representative who helped you? Do you remember how long the line was?
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here
Yeah.
thinking, this is associated with travel, and I know already
Mm.
that all of these things they already know this data, yet they're asking me to repeat it. And this 2-minute
Yeah.
survey turns into sometimes a lot longer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
start talking about transactional surveys, make them frequent and focused.
Yeah, yeah. So it's also a fine balance between asking just one question, like you were mentioning, and also getting experience, their feedback on experience attributes, the different attributes, and things like that. That will just an overall number is good and can be tracked, but how do you improve on that? Maybe you need an attribute or two to quantify that, to make sure where do you improve, right? How do you improve?
No, exactly. I mean, as you're talking about operational metrics, root cause is very significant in that.
Yeah,
And I'll talk about that a little in some of the common mistakes, because
yeah.
wouldn't it be great to know, how do they feel about our
Mm.
stores clean? Wouldn't it be great to
Mm.
know what they think about our parking lot or our neighborhood?
Yeah.
You start getting into that, but I truly believe that there are ways that you can approach this, um,
Yeah.
such that you don't have to burden the customer
Yeah.
with a bunch of click through. And it's easy for me to go back and talk about NPS Plus as that approach, because NPS had this promise of you're going to go in, you're going to ask one question in an open end, and you have everything you need to know about the customer. Well,
Yeah.
I remember when it was emerging in the marketplace a long time ago. How experienced I am. I existed before NPS existed. The that promise, a lot of clients grabbed onto that and said, I want that. I want exactly that. And then they realized, like, text analytics didn't provide what they needed. And it didn't, so let's start coding all these things. And it actually cost more to code it than it was to actually field the survey, because the text analytics tools weren't as sophisticated.
Yeah.
Fast forward almost 20 years. And guess
Mm.
what? The text analytics still isn't that great. It's a lot
Yeah.
better. It's a lot more
Mm.
automated, but it misses out on a lot of themes. It misses out on some of the things you're trying to do. So we end up defaulting back to adding a bunch of attributes. And I am not opposed to adding a few attributes, especially for some very significant areas that might be a root cause for a decline in satisfaction with a transaction. But that's where I love positioning the NPS Plus, because you could have a long list of root causes and just say, tell us the one thing that stood out the most. And they can
Yeah.
click on it without having to, if you have 20 things on that list and you listed them as attributes, that's 20 clicks for the
Yeah.
customer,
Yeah.
versus NPS Plus, where one click and it stands out. And then it's okay to add, and you can evaluate the root causes that are being clicked on, and then add a couple of attributes specific to that so you can get a little more detail. Or even an open end says, hey, you keep clicking on the store location. Tell me more about the problem with the store location. And you can get a little more detail on it, and in a focused open end so that you really can look at what's causing the concerns. And I think it's, it's that mix between, there's a lot of people that like to do that analytical deep dive for attributes. And hey, I'm a math person. I'm all into that. And at the same time, you have to make this stuff operational. I recall with one client, we ran, I think there were 26 attributes in the survey.
God.
And
what was your response rate for that? I mean, I can't even imagine answering a survey.
Believe it or not, it was actually pretty good. It was a toy company, so to be fair, it's a little more fun. But the they were averaging about a 15 to 17% response rate on their survey.
That's really high. Yeah,
really good. But it was so interesting because first thing we did is, of course, you get these 26 attributes, you run them against the overall KPI, and the first thing that happens is everything correlates. Why? Because people are rating those attributes, and you get what's called multicollinearity. And so everything that, when someone rates, their overall high, their attributes may have some variance, but they're going to be overall high. And then suddenly you start piling, attribute after, response after response, and then everything's statistically significant. So even if it moves by 0.1, but it still results in really an unclear direction in where to go with all these. And the next, I remember the next thing after, running this for 6 months after I told them they should shorten the list, the next thing they came back with is, well, let's run a factor analysis and see what we should cut out of the survey. And I'm like, all right, great. We're going to run a factor analysis, and it's going to shorten things. And then you'll get something like store location, and store location can mean so many things to so many people that, again, they'll say, oh, well, let's ask about store location in terms of neighborhood, store location, distance from home, and store, suddenly you get that, you're expanding the list again. So I've always found that it's easy to swear by a short survey. It's much harder to do in practice.
Yeah. And at least this company that you were talking about, they were willing to come in and iterate and actually make those changes. So a lot of times, once the survey is out, I mean, okay, now the survey is out, we just have to work with what we get. And I mean, no, you can go in there, you can make the changes, understand what actually has an impact, right?
Yeah.
Reduce your survey, iterate, right? Always iterate just to make sure you have the right questionnaire out there. Yeah.
I've long said that so often when we're launching customer experience studies, everyone gets to the point where it launches and everyone's like, hooray, we can breathe now. And I've always said, no, this is when the real work begins.
Yeah.
Because now you have to respond. And, I'll talk about that and some of the common mistakes. But, once you launch the study, that, even though it may seem like it's the hard part, that's the easy part.
Easy part. Yeah. And I think we've spoken about NPS Plus enough. I think it's only right to everyone who's joined. We'll share documentation. If we have time at the end of the show, maybe you can share your screen and just walk them through what that looks like.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
not, we will make sure we send some documentation on that so you know what we're talking about, how it looks, and the advantages of it.
Yeah. Always happy to share it. It's such an innovative feature on our question pro system that, not only, we talked about root cause, but it also does churn risk analysis, as well as, the open end. We actually stole a feature from our communities platform and allow people to vote on other people's comments, which is really cool. So
yeah.
But
I was demoing it to a client the other day, and he was like, "This is just brilliant. I don't know why I didn't think of it." I'm like join question.
I thought of it for years and years and years, and everyone said, well, oftentimes you get the, well, how scientifically sound is it? Well, this isn't, operations is not a science. You look at some numbers and you have to make a decision. And the same is true when we field our CX surveys. You have to be able to look at something and say, make a decision and make it happen. So, when we talk NPS, it's been around, there's room to innovate. Even even the creators, the founders of NPS would say, it's not a one size fits all. You have to customize it based on your situation. We have employee NPS, transactional NPS, which weren't part of the original design, but part of the original design was what we call relationship NPS.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so with that, I'll sort of jump to the relationship side of things, and
Yeah.
how those surveys look a little bit different. And
Yeah.
as much as I preach, we've got to have a short survey for our customers and the ease of mind. I almost go the polar opposite when it comes to relationship surveys. And similarly, NPS is a terrific measure in there. I have it in there. I talk about it. From a benchmarking perspective, looking across your journey, it's great to have, and then be able to relate it to your relationship survey. But a relationship survey is much more than about one transaction. And probably the biggest mistake I see people do with relationship surveys is the first thing they do is they say, let me ask you about your last transaction. Or even better, let me ask you the NPS question about your last transaction before we get to the NPS survey. When that happens, what you end up doing is you narrow down what you're able to accomplish. And the relationship survey really should be wide ranging. It should span all parts of the journey, and it really has to be something that talks about the relationship and what you need to do in the relationship, not just, give me some quick feedback on some pain points. I tend to say a relationship survey will have more than one open end. I know that's, contrary to a lot of how people like to design surveys, but if you get down to something and say, hey, this part of the process is broken, you want them to be able to give that feedback. I think the other part of it is it's not frequent. Relationship surveys shouldn't be happening every time a transaction happens, which it feels like some transactional surveys, like I said, do feel like relationship surveys sometimes. That example I gave earlier, that is a really, that was a really long survey. The other thing, it's, a transactional survey is triggered. It's based on who does something. A relationship survey at some point in the year should go out to every one of your customers, every single one of them. And I can see value and benefit of saying, we're going to run a relationship survey twice a year and send it out to all customers, or once a year, whatever the frequency is. And I can also see the benefit of just saying, hey, we're going to churn people through this survey every so often. We're just going to send out, every week we're going to send out an invitation, so we have an understanding of the relationship. I think there's benefits to both, and you should really evaluate what the use case is, and how you will respond to that information. And how you'll use that information, because certainly if you run a continuous relationship survey, you're able to track trends in the marketplace. I think the greatest example, few years back, FedEx caught one of their customers caught the guy on video throwing a package over the fence. And because they were running a continuous relationship survey, they could see the impact both immediately and as well as what the recovery time was. And it was a really good teaching moment across the entire organization, because they could see, hey, this hurt us, and it hurt us really bad. And so the impact was there, the sort of gasping moment by everyone in the organization, and realizing that, for a company that, basically thrives on the idea that we are a service organization, a service first organization, a slip in service like that. Sure, if the person got that transactional survey for that delivery, I'm sure that was a poor score, but it impacts a lot more than just that. So, it's really important that which one you want to do and when you do it, in terms of, do we do it continuously or one at a time. I think the other, I talk about there at the bottom, it's multi-department. This is not about a transactional survey is like, hey, we want to talk about the call center. Hey, we want to talk about the store operations. Hey, we want to talk about, it could even be about the marketing that went out there. That can be part of the experience, like I said. So, but really it has to be a multi-department. And I'll still throw a caution here, and we'll talk about the mistakes. But one of the cautions I throw in here is that we can't have a multi-department survey being, shall I say, built by a committee. Even though it's multi-department, you really need to focus on the key issues. That's why I say sometimes an additional open end helps. And then the last thing I'll talk about when it comes to relationship survey is you really should be linking it to something, linking it to customer loyalty, linking it to financials. And it's great to do that in a transactional survey, but that transactional survey, if you're trying to keep it short, to the point, and it's so, I mean, depending on the type of interaction, I mean, some people will say a travel experience is, only a couple of times a year interaction. And then someone will speak to me and say, well, how many times did you fly this year? Well, in 2020, even, I still flew the top tier of mileage for the airline that I fly. I mean, I flew almost as much in 2020 as I did 2019. Now, there were different reasons for it. So, that part of the transaction was a little bit different, but when you drive back to the relationship survey, you should be able to say, this is how our service across the board is affecting everything. Because just like we talk about when you start doing correlations with the attributes, if you try to do that with every transactional survey, you're going to get, I call it a blended mess, because how I feel about one transaction may not be how I feel about the company as a whole.
Yeah. So typically what do you recommend the length of a relationship survey? I mean, with transactional, less than 5, right? Less than 5 minutes. I mean, 5 minutes is on the higher end. 3 minutes, yeah. So 5 on the higher end, but 3 and below, ideally. For relationship, what do you recommend?
And it's very difficult to make a solid recommendation, because clearly, if you have a business to business relationship survey going out, you're probably going to be a little bit longer. You're going to get a little bit more detail, and that can be, I like to say, push that upper end to about 15 minutes, though the reality is sometimes it hits 20. If you're talking a frequent, if you're doing something where you have frequent transactional surveys available, try to make it 7 minutes. I mean, if you're talking a retail store, most people don't spend, I know market researchers find this hard to believe, but most people don't spend most of their day thinking about their relationship with the customer experience of the retailer they shop at for groceries. So, so to capture their attention for 7 minutes is probably a significant boon for anyone that can get them for 7 minutes. So, and the other thing is, if you really have to go longer, and sometimes you do, I understand it. I mean, there are complicated relationships everywhere. I worked with a software developer that everyone in the world knows, and the survey was closer to 30 minutes. Well, why? Because they were into everything. They were into the software, the hardware, the servicing, the licensing, and reseller licenses. So it could be a little bit longer. And if it gets longer, make sure you give them some incentive to give you that feedback. Show that you appreciate them. And sometimes it's simple things. If you're talking a retailer, hey, maybe we're going to give you $1 off your next transaction. But if you're talking something much larger than that, if you're talking B2B, they're taking a half hour of their day sometimes just to fill out the survey. So show that you value their time just as much as you value their feedback.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So with that, I'm going to jump into I'm going to give 8 common mistakes. And I'll tell you, I could probably have taken this list to about
multiple
50,
slides.
but I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. So I have 8 common mistakes, and I'm throwing in a bonus one at the end. I don't know if you want to call it 9, but it's something that often talked about and often overlooked. But I think the first one I always, no clear path for root cause. And we talked about root cause quite a bit. And if you're putting together a survey and you have no idea what you're going to do with the data after you get it, you really need to rethink what you're doing. I mentioned NPS plus, but some people add attribute after attribute after attribute. And one of my favorites. In fact, it was that same client I referred to earlier, the toy company, when someone said, "Oh, let's add a few questions about location," and they said, the CEO actually popped in and said, "So what is that going to accomplish? We're not going to shut down a store and reopen it in a different
Yeah.
location."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
the reality. Sometimes you think you definitely want to know answers, but get answers that you can do something with.
Yeah.
So the next one I like to talk about is lack of ownership, and it's very similar to what we were just referencing there.
Yeah.
This can be for every question and for every touch point. We often have touch points where the owner isn't present. I've seen it several times where, hey, we're going to put together a customer experience program, and we're going to put a survey on the website. And oh, by the way, we didn't include anyone from IT in this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're the ones that are responsible for developing, managing, maintaining, and we didn't bring anyone in. So we're just going to ask similar questions to what we ask. And you've got to remember that, these touch points, the people that own the processes and operations within that touch point, they're going to have a different view. Just like our customers will have a different view, touch point owners will have a different view than someone sitting on the outside. And it's good to get feedback from everyone. It really is, to understand what the internal operational pain points are, as well as the external. And, it comes back to, don't ask. Sometimes you don't want to ask a question where you already know the answer and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's true when it comes to even something like a website survey where, hey, don't talk about offering free shipping if you're never going to offer free shipping. And then
this is actually something that we had covered in one of our previous shows as well, just the ownership, right? When you're building out this questionnaire, one, to get their inputs, but also after the data comes in, unless there is somebody who is responsible for that particular attribute, it's just going to slip through the cracks, right? Nobody's going to work on it. It's just a matter of collecting feedback then, but nobody's actioning upon it. So having that ownership
and that's why you have to have an owner for every question as well. I know that seems like ridiculous. Sometimes the owners are the same, but they have to own that question. And I remember working with, this was a very large international conglomerate company that had different brands, branches, stores. They did shipping, they did retail, they did office space. I mean, how many different businesses can you be in? At one point, we were looking at, hey, we need to trim down the survey. Surveys grow over time. I get that. Sometimes you think, oh, I need to ask a question. Now I need to trend this over time, things like that. And something ends up in there forever. And we pulled all the stakeholders from all these different touch points and said, okay, we're going to sit down and say, who gets the report on this question? And, we went through, I want to say it was about 80 different questions across multiple surveys. So it's not a single survey, but 80 questions. And we're going through, by the time we got to the end of it, we had 7 questions that people were actually getting the report for. And so it was definitely time to say, there's not an owner for this. You're not going to make change. And as much as it's great to have all that data and say, I can analyze it and do this and that, no amount of analysis will get something operational done.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is, checking the customer survey box, which is probably the opposite end of these two here. Value your customer's time. Don't run a survey just to feel better. If someone calls me up and says, hey, I just need to run a survey, I say, so what are your goals? What are your goals? Just tell me your goals.
Yeah.
Oh, well, my CEO said I need to run a survey. We have to do CX because CX is an important differentiator. I agree with you. CX is an important differentiator for the brand. I wholeheartedly agree with that. But you can't just run a survey to run a survey. If you're not going to do something with it, if you're just checking a box and saying, oh, we have a CX program, we have a CXO, we have a chief customer officer, a director of CX, but save the time, save the energy, focus on something else, fix your return.
We have
policy.
An NPS score, right? I get that quite often. We have an NPS score, but that's about it.
and so, I mean, there's some others that are related to that, some other concerns that are related to that, but I mean, it just, you can't always just keep making the mistake of, oh, we're just going to do it because it's a feel good thing. We've talked about this, asking too many questions and asking what you know. That's so common. It needs to be reiterated over and over again, but we talked about that quite a bit. And then asking too little. I know it seems like the opposite, doesn't it? But realistically, as I mentioned before, if you think CX is just one survey, you're not thinking CX. That's plain and simple as it can be. So lack of touch point consistency. I talked about, it's a multi-department effort. It's not, we have to have ways to have everyone accountable. So have a measure. And that's why I said NPS can happen in a transactional and a relationship study, because then you have some consistency across it and you have consistent messaging. I think my favorite story with this one is we were running out 2 different surveys for 2 different departments. One was really focused on the online fulfillment. The second one was focused on in-store interactions. And if you had read the surveys, you wouldn't even know they were from the same company.
Oh, God.
First of all, neither of them mentioned who they're. And I was like, wait, you didn't even mention your company name in here. Why don't you tell them who you are first? But there was just a lack of consistency in the branding. One was sending, one color theme. The other was sending another color theme. The language was different. It felt like it was coming from 2 different organizations. And then, survey by committee. We talked about this. Worst thing you can do. You want people to be engaged. You want people to bring people in and get their feedback, but don't try to write a survey by committee. I won't even name who it is, but I'm actually have worked with one client. It took 6 months to get the first survey in the field. And it had nothing to do with, usually the delay is like getting data and having data transfer agreements, things. No, all of that was in place. We couldn't get everyone to agree on the wording of it. Was one question in the survey. And it went on. And every time we sent the version back, one person would complain, that we'd change it back, and another person would complain. And it went back and forth for almost 6 months like that. And then I talk about this a lot. Budget-driven CX programs. Again, it's sort of like that first one, like, hey, if you're just checking the box, if you're already thinking about, oh, well, we don't have enough money to spend on CX for a platform or a provider, a service provider, you're never going to make that change that you have to commit to. Change comes from much cross-channel commitment. You're going to have people associated with it. You're going to have departments associated with it. And guess what? If you're asking your customers what you can do differently, you have to be prepared to do something differently. So if the first thing you get down to is, oh, well, I only have $1,500 to spend on a CX program. Well, you're not going to have a very good CX program. You're really gonna kill the program before it ever starts.
Yeah.
And then I said I had one bonus point, which I'll throw out there, and it's meeting the customers on their terms. And a lot of the feedback tools that we have out there have all sorts of ways to gather feedback. And every provider, Question Pro, and all of our competitors all have some unique things about them that we push out there and say, hey, this is what makes us unique. But just don't assume sending out your survey is the best way to get their feedback. And a great example of that is, we talk about frequently that in the US it's pretty common to send the survey via email. It's quite uncommon to send it via SMS. But in other locations, that's the preferred mode. Some people like to just have a feedback mechanism that they can go to, and they know they can dependably go to. And that might be a website intercept, a website feedback tab, or even a comment box where they can click on the website and say, hey, I just want to give you feedback about something that happened to me. So it can take many shapes, but often it's really about giving them a voice to say, I had this experience, whether it was good or bad, I just want to tell you about it. So make sure you have something to meet them on their terms, because if you're running a true relationship and transactional CX focused program, there's going to be places where some customers will fall out and end up not getting one or the other for one reason. It could be they haven't spent in a while, or They, they have a resting period where they, they can't get another survey for another couple of, days, weeks, whatever it is. Anything like that can happen. You still want to have them have a place where they can reach out and give you some feedback.
Yeah. Brilliant. It's a great way to end the list of common mistakes and the advantages there. Do you have? I know we're slightly over time. Do you want to go through the NPS Plus, or would you like us to just share the documentation, Ken?
Yeah, I will. I will load up a NPS Plus example here so you can see it.
Yeah.
And
So just before we move on, I come back bearing questions.
Hi, Prachi.
Hi. This has been so informative even for me. I'm here taking my notes.
I'm glad.
Yeah, so we had a question pop up as you guys were going along. So I think we'll just cover that. I think so when we were talking about relationship surveys and, it should be tied to an experience or something. So one of our viewers has a question saying, so would hyper personalized surveys be better to conduct because they're often but linked to experiences? Mainly about should the surveys be hyper personalized?
I'm very much in favor of hyper personalization with customer experience surveys, and there's a lot of levels to that. Certainly, when you start talking about a retail transaction or even something a little more advanced like an automotive in B2C space, there's going to be, you have to have some personalization. A retail transaction, it might be as simple as, hey, it was this date, this time in which you purchased these products. So that they know that, hey, if anyone's like me, I mean, I go to the grocery store multiple times a day. Sometimes it's 4 minutes down the road. There's no reason for me to, think, oh, I have to plan dinner a week in advance. So, I'll be there multiple times. And if I got a survey, I'd be like, which one was this for? So,
Yeah.
and then on the other side, I mean, especially with B2B, it really should be hyper personalized. We're talking to someone who plans events and things like that. And, when you're doing an event plan, and our marketing director, Crystal, knows all too well about this, like you're working with a lot of people to get that up and running. A lot of internal parties and a lot of external parties. So it's very important that, not only just identify, can you, I remember the question was, do you remember the name of your sales manager? Well, was it John or James? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And so I put in James, but if it was John, but maybe James now gets in trouble for the feedback I get. So being able to hyper personalize it and bringing them the information, like I said, that we already know about it, is really critical. And really, the customers feel really good about it. And, the case I always like to bring up, and it's more after the survey that this happened to me, but the case I always bring up is I was traveling the same week after week to the same location, renting a car, going to my work site, coming back, doing it every week. I had a bad experience one week. I conducted the survey. I let them know I had this bad experience. And as a result, I got a nice little, hey, here's $25 off your next rental. And I thought, well, let me try this. So I did it again the next week. I just gave them a bad score.
Yeah.
I got it again. I did it again. Do you know that I had like 40 of these $25 coupons? I could have saved a lot of money. I didn't do it, but I was trying to do it. And the problem was they weren't personalizing it. They weren't looking at it and saying, this is a guy that rents every week. The first time I got a phone call was when I stopped traveling there. And someone called me and said, well, gee, we noticed you haven't rented in 2 weeks. Well, it's like, well, that's a little too late to find out. Maybe you lost a customer. Now, they didn't lose a customer because of poor service. They lost a customer because my need had changed. But, it's important to personalize like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. That makes a lot of sense. Great.
So I'll share my screen here and just run you through, a quick view of what it looks like for the NPS Plus. It's very simple. it really helps us out. This is what the build looks like, but I'll take you what the experience looks like, because that's what we want the customers to feel. So as you run through it, it's your typical NPS plus your NPS question. You can see as I scroll over, you can actually add
I'm
commentary.
not sure if you're sharing your screen, Ken.
Really?
Yeah, I don't. Are they?
There we go.
For a second.
Yep.
Let me try it again.
Yep.
Oh, there it goes.
Here we
go. Yeah.
So, love live shows. So it's your typical NPS question. We do have these little phrases at the bottom that can help guide people so they understand. Hey, I'm not sure. I won't recommend. And then as you click on it, the first thing it does, it brings up all these attributes that we normally just run this long list of attributes, and instead we can condense it and just tell us the one thing that stands out. And if every customer is being honest, they'll be able to say one stands out over the other, even if professionalism and communications are two of the highest. They're going to be able to pick one. So when they pick that one, it helps build it. And as I mentioned, we actually do have the voting on the open-end comments. So you can actually, it's not here, but it's you can actually vote on others' comments and say, okay, I can look at this. It's very simple. I just ran through what could be an entire transactional survey in about 2 minutes with commentary. But what comes out of it is even better, because now you can start getting into, as I mentioned, not just root cause and the trends and things like that, but you see the NPS showing up, you see the trends showing up, but then you can start getting into the root cause. What makes promoters happy? What are the passives and detractors need to see improvement on? And using this information here, we're actually able to determine if there's some people at churn risk. I mean, there are passives who, say things are okay, but if things are okay for too long, they're going to eventually leave your company when they have a better deal. Promoters are happy. So we actually can build from these root causes the churn risk and be able to, show the risk that you have of leaving people in either of these categories, particularly when you start talking about work quality and, understand, what's contributing to that. So.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yep. And it all works as just one widget that you just add on, right? So it just makes it simple for the analysis as well. Yeah.
And when you do the voting, there's actually, we don't have any voting on this one, but you can actually have people vote and help you innovate and co-create. So those open-end comments, I always, when we work with product, I say to people, like, you have to have more than one person that wants to have that feature to make it part of the product. That can be true with your customer experience. If you have one person just saying, hey, I'd like you to give me everything for free. Well, I think everyone would like that. But if you have one person that says, if you added $50,000 worth of value onto my product, then I'd be happier. And someone else would have to say it before it takes shape. So you're not building this customized little, hey, here's a car that has Bluetooth in one case and Apple Play in the other case and Android Play in the other case, and now you have 3 different versions you have to roll out. No, you find what common people want commonly across all of it.
Yeah, it's literally getting your customers to do your job for you, right? So not only are they giving you your suggestions, they're actually validating the suggestions for you.
Exactly.
So you get the highest ranked suggestions, and then you can just take it from there towards action planning, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. We can probably share, more documentation, go through this in a little bit more detail and how the output looks, questionnaire looks, things like that. And we'll share it with all of the participants here.
And if they ever have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. We've been rolling it out for about 1.5 years now, and it's been very successful. Our clients love it.
Awesome.
It's amazing.
Prachi, any other questions for Ken, or should we wrap up?
So we've been taking questions on comments, but one comment was that it was a lovely experience with some dogs in the background as well. So
and weren't we talking about that before?
Yes, exactly. So I'm thinking we can have a session, another show in a couple of weeks where we just have them in the forefront. Okay, you're going to be there anyway.
Just hold them
you know,
and you have them looking at the
yeah,
screen.
yeah. Bring your pet to the live show to experience matters.
Exactly.
Lovely.
Great. No, this is amazing. And just for any of our viewers who might have missed any part of this, we will be posting, the video of the entire episode on YouTube, on LinkedIn. We are here in the comments, so any questions you can either, comment on any of those videos or drop us an email. And like Shibani said, we'll send out, information on NPS Plus, and we'll send out frameworks. So, yeah. And we will be back next week again with a
Yes.
super fun episode.
Yeah. And Ken a few weeks down the line again. So looking forward to session number 2 already.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you for
Thank you,
joining.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.